We're doing a special NFL draft video. Welcome in. He's Bill Connelly. I am Drew Martin. You can follow him on Twitter at SBN_Bill C. In my opinion, he's the best college football writer in the world. Definitely towards the college football betting markets. Really has a lot of emphasis in where those are going. Bill Connelly, welcome in. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Excited to get your opinion here on a lot of this NFL draft, and we'll also get some of your opinion going into next year as far as college football goes. But really, just off the top of your head here, going into the NFL draft, is there anything, any surprises that you could see happening maybe in the first round, in the second round that maybe the mainstream media hasn't seen yet?
Well, I think the media has started to ask this question over the last week, so it kind of killed my answer a little bit. But I'm very, very curious what happens if Kyler Murray doesn't go number one. I think he will. I mean, it seems, when you've got Cliff Kingsbury as your head coach, you should have, the guy he said should be picked number one, and I think that would end up being a pretty good relationship. But his status as a prospect in general is so unique, and because his abilities are so unique, and I'm not sure where he's really regarded with anybody else. So, when you see these mock drafts floating around, and obviously it's kind of mock speed for those right now, if Murray goes number one, everything kind of fits. But if he doesn't, I think that upends a whole heck of a lot, and you end up with a completely different draft because I don't know how far he falls.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. And going right into the quarterbacks, I mean, fitting into Cliff Kingsbury's system seems like the perfect fit. However, he I guess some of the measurables people have question marks about, something like height. In your numbers and in your opinion, does that affect him at all going to the next level, or do you think that's overblown?
Well, I think it's certainly, when you look at Baker Mayfield's success, when you look at Drew Brees' ongoing success, it isn't a strength to be short, but it can obviously be overcome. I'm more concerned when it comes to Murray, I'm more concerned with, his production ended up almost better than Baker Mayfield's in a lot of ways at Oklahoma, but he did go off script more. And, he's more prone to flee the pocket. He's more prone to trust his legs. And that works out really well because he has Major League Baseball speed. He's got his ability, his skill set is so unique that he can improvise, and maybe he can get away with that in the pros more than like a Johnny Manziel could, for instance. But it's a risk, and it's an obvious risk. And I think he's got easily the most upside at the quarterback position of anybody in this draft. But I understand if you want to ding him for certain things like the improvising and whatnot, I can't necessarily combat that. I can't necessarily tell you you're automatically wrong there.
And what do your numbers say about just his throwing accuracy? How good of the jump to the NFL? How do you think Kyler Murray is going to handle that as far as his just throwing numbers in college compared to the projections in the NFL?
Yeah, one of the ways that I look at the stats, obviously there's not a single formula you can create that will just perfectly project what you're going to do at the next level. But one of the things I try to look at is you are absolutely not going to exceed your college stats at the pro level, like the rate stats, the adjusted yards per attempt, the success rate, and some of the efficiency numbers I look at. So we at least know your ceiling, right? If you're not going to exceed your college stats, then your college stats are your ceiling. And Kyler Murray's is just so much higher than everybody else's. Any sort of projection you make that doesn't take into account things like he's short are going to be otherworldly for Kyler Murray because his efficiency level was so much higher than everybody else's. So in that regard, I think the odds are in his favor here. If he fails, we kind of know how he will fail or what will hold him back. But man, he just produced what he did last year. I was so high on Tua Tagovailoa halfway through last season. I wrote about how he was doing things that we had never, from a production standpoint, that we had never really seen before. And Kyler Murray had caught and surpassed him by the end of the year. I cannot say enough about how good he was on the field last year.
Yeah, and we're talking with Bill Connelly from SB Nation on Twitter at SBN_Bill C, the creator of the S&P Plus ratings, and also he brought up success rate. And talking about success rate in college as a passer, and you never exceed that in the NFL, going off of some of your numbers from SB Nation, the articles you've written so far, and how guys have dropped off from last year. Especially in the first 4 or 5 quarterbacks drafted, man, like Josh Rosen, some of these guys really fell off hard. What about some of the top top quarterback draftees in this class that you could see having that kind of same troublesome jump to the NFL.
Yeah, after, it's Murray up here in terms of college production, and then you've got Haskins below him, and then it gets a little blurry after that. I think Will Grier kind of clears the bar statistically. I mean, his ceiling should be very high, but you get a guy like, I'm a Missouri guy. I've seen every pass Drew Lock has thrown in his career, and I watched him grow pretty dramatically just about every single year that he was here. So I have a lot more confidence in him now than I did before. But from a stat standpoint, the efficiency angle at least brings a little bit of reason for concern. He was higher than, I think he ended up being around what Josh Rosen produced from an efficiency standpoint for his career. If you take out his true freshman year, because I did see every pass he threw that year, and that Missouri offense was just no quarterback was going to succeed in that offense with that line and that receiving core and that injured running back core and all those other things. If you take out his freshman year and only look at his last three, then he starts to get pretty close to Will Grier from an efficiency standpoint. So maybe he's okay there, but I think there's at least a little reason for concern. He throws the most gorgeous deep ball you've ever seen. He throws from every possible angle, but he does sometimes miss on throws. His catchability on certain easier throws isn't as high, and that can catch up to you. So I can certainly see why people would be concerned about Drew Lock. The other quarterback that everybody's talking about as a first rounder, Daniel Jones. His from an efficiency standpoint, his bar is the lowest of anybody projected anywhere near the top of the draft. The only guy he's ahead of in terms of this year's quarterback draft prospects is Clayton Thorson. I don't see him playing at a particularly efficient level in the pros, and it's been really it's been confusing to see his name mentioned with the others who have a much stronger base to rely on there.
And do you think that Daniel Jones is getting kind of a boost here because of his coach in college and being able, to like Peyton Manning, pretty much both Manning guys undercut Cliff and doing so well in the pros? Do you think that that's something that is either helping him a lot or maybe hindering him just because he got that extra boost from such a great quarterback coach in college?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might hinder him from the perspective of, if you get overdrafted and you're probably more likely to get asked to produce before you may be ready to. And obviously, he's not like a top 5 candidate or anything like that. He's not going to be tossed into the deep end in that regard. But no, I think he's been just dramatically inconsistent throughout 3 years as a starter at Duke. And the biggest thing he has going for him, an NFL scout told me this. He looks like a Manning when he's dropping back to pass. When he's surveying the field, he has that stature and the footwork and all those other things. But when he starts to throw the ball, he stops looking like a Manning. And for all of his good games, he was great against Northwestern. He was great against Temple, a pretty good Temple to pass defense. He was great against North Carolina. He had a lot of really, really good games. He also had a lot of really terrible games, and he was still having them late in his junior year. So that consistency never really came around, and that would be a massive concern of mine. No matter how much you look like Peyton Manning when you're dropping back to pass, he's been nowhere near consistent as Manning. So I think the fact that his coach, David Cutcliffe, was Manning's coach, was the other Manning's coach, I think that's helping him a lot here. Even though Cutcliffe hasn't really produced any standout pros since the Mannings, it still seems to be helping him a lot.
Yeah, good stuff, Bill. And guys, we're going to hit on a couple other position groups here and then also get Bill's outlook towards the college football season for next year. But before we get on to wide receivers and running backs here, Bill, is there a sleeper quarterback that you want to throw out there that maybe the market is not really focusing on, a guy that might really help the team that he's drafted to?
Greer, well, I guess Greer is probably too high to be considered a sleeper, but on down the line, again, thinking of things from a ceilings perspective, Brett Rippon was probably the fourth, or among these prospects that we're talking about, Brett Rippon was probably the fourth or fifth best college quarterback of that bunch. He'll trust his arm a little too much sometimes, but he was very efficient overall, very high completion rate, very high efficiency level, which is a little different than completion rate. And I'm really curious if he ends up in a good system, wherever he ends up, 3rd to 5th round, somewhere in there, maybe a little lower. I'm really curious what he can do at the next level. And if you're looking for extreme sleepers, Jordan Ta'amu at Ole Miss, obviously he had a receiving core with three potential pros, three guys who are probably going to get drafted, a couple of them drafted very high, and clearly that helped him out a lot. But for all the talk about Shea Patterson at Ole Miss, and he was a blue chip recruit, he outproduced Shea Patterson at Ole Miss. He did more with that receiving core than Shea Patterson did in 2017, and I think that bears mentioning. I can't imagine he's anything more than a 6 or 7 round pick, and maybe there's a reason for that. But his production should earn him a look at the very least.
Bill, let's move on to the wide receivers here. On SB Nation, guys, if you haven't read it, Bill put out some great stuff on the NFL draft as far as a lot of analytics numbers, what they produced in college and how that projects to the NFL. And wide receivers here, you have the secret to drafting a wide receiver, focusing on the numbers that matter. Do you just want to go over a couple of those numbers real quick and what teams should be focusing on?
Yeah, so one of the things I do that I think has helped me out a lot is I really try to separate efficiency from explosiveness to a large degree. That helps me with the S&P Plus rankings because explosiveness is very random. Even if you are better at big plays than other teams, you don't have much control over when those big plays come. Efficiency is far more predictive, far better for a predictive system of analytics. So that carries a lot more weight. And it turns out it's kind of the same when it comes to college to pro projections. That explosiveness, whether a running back or a receiver, just looking at like yards per catch, for instance, or my marginal explosiveness, it doesn't necessarily translate. The efficiency angle does. So a guy like A.J. Brown, a guy like Marquise Hollywood Brown, those guys were extremely efficient at the college level. That will probably translate moving forward. But for explosiveness, you kind of have to look at, actually 40 time translates. This is maybe the one area, the one position group where 40 times actually measures something interesting. So you look at that and maybe a little bit of the college explosiveness levels, and you get a much better idea of who might be able to produce big plays at the next level instead of specifically looking at yards per catch. So, what that tells me is most of the guys at the top of the prospects list, Marquise Brown, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, those guys probably translates pretty well. They are reasonably likely to live up to their hype. A guy like N'Keal Harry wasn't as efficient at the college level, and maybe he's going to run into some problems separating from coverage. And of course, DK Metcalf. I mean, we all know why he is a high level draft prospect. He had big plays in college, and he can run the 4.3 whatever 40 at 280 pounds or whatever he's at right now. But his consistency was not nearly that of A.J. Brown or even his other Ole Miss receiving core mate, DeMarcus Lodge. And I think that's concern. So I would have a problem based on the way I was looking at the numbers. I would have a problem with DK Metcalf being the top prospect, the top receiver prospect drafted, I should say.
And Bill, the wide receiver position drafting, I think is the most interesting and tough to do because it relies on so much these numbers like you're talking about, who's throwing them the ball. And last year in your article, you wrote about DJ Moore coming from Maryland, a bunch of injuries at the quarterback position, and then going to Carolina and having Cam Newton throwing the ball. And it was such a big, just the quarterback step up in class. So, I mean, how does that affect your numbers?
It usually doesn't as much as we think it's going to. It's still, there are on kind of the low end. If your efficiency numbers were a little lower, but you're still considered a high draft prospect, maybe you can overachieve those numbers. But for the most part, it's still the whole your college ceiling or your college production is your pro ceiling. That still mostly translates. With him, it did not. Apparently, we found the limit to that theory, and it is basically if you go from being thrown passes by Maryland's third string quarterback or a different quarterback every week at Maryland, basically, because of all the injuries and everything that was happening there, that clearly impacted his college production. And we know that because as soon as Cam Newton was throwing in the ball, he was crazy efficient. And so that was still the exception for the most part. That doesn't usually happen. For the most part, last year's rookies, their efficiency levels, it still kind of tracked that they were producing what their efficiency levels said they would, but he was a massive exception.
Man, we're talking with Bill Connelly from SB Nation on Twitter at SBN_Bill. Bill C, and he does write-ups on all 130 plus college football teams getting ready for next year. We'll get into his thoughts on next year's college football. Just want to finish up with the draft here, Bill. Moving on to the running backs, we got some bets here on I just got a Sportsbook up here as far as running backs selected in round one, under or over one running back selected. Would you take the over or under on that number?
I think it's going to be one, but I think it probably leans toward under. We know that no matter where prospects are graded overall, some of the skill position guys always end up creeping up a little higher than we expect them to. But I mean, really, Josh Jacobs is primarily the only guy you usually see in the top 50 draft prospects, for the most part, at least. And so I think the odds are pretty good he's the only one. I honestly, with the number of defensive linemen in this draft, with the number of offensive linemen in this draft, I have a problem taking any running back or receiver in the first round, to be honest. But Josh Jacobs included. He's pretty much a guaranteed efficiency weapon. He doesn't have a lot of explosiveness potential necessarily, the way I've been looking at this thing. So I would not, if I were in charge, I would say definite under. There would be 0 in the first round. I assume there will be 1, though.
And it sounds to be more of a defensive, at least top-heavy draft. Seeing numbers here is over or under 16.5 defensive players drafted in round one, juice towards the over. Would you take the over or the under on 16.5 defensive players in round one?
I would definitely take the over. With the way the prospects, with the distribution of talent, there should be 16.5 defensive linemen drafted in the first round this year. And we know that's not going to happen, but I would definitely shade over there. That's where the talent is in this draft.
What about over under 3.5 Alabama players drafted in round one?
I think that's under. Obviously, Jacobs is likely. Quinnen Williams is guaranteed. Jonah Williams is guaranteed. After that, I'm not real sure. You never know, those 28 to 32 picks, who's going to get a wild hair, which direction they're going to go there. But I would assume whether we're talking about Irv Smith, the tight end, whether we're talking about Thompson, the safety, Mac Wilson, the linebacker, Damian Harris, I guess, the running back, all of those are possible, but I think it's just 3. I think those 3 are safe, and after that, I'm not necessarily seeing any I trust there.
Great stuff on the NFL draft, Bill. And guys, we're talking with Bill Connelly from SB Nation. In my opinion, the best college football writer in the world, the creator of the S&P Plus ratings. You can find those on SB Nation. It's pretty easy. Just click on the college football tab. Bill's name will show up there towards the top. Bill, just looking at your top 10 now, you got Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, LSU, Oklahoma, Florida, Ohio State, Auburn, Michigan, and then number 10, Mississippi State. 1, is that correct? And 2, any surprises there in your top 10 when you ran your numbers and kind of finally came up with your top 10?
Yeah, that is the top 10. Okay. No, I think the biggest surprise for me was Mississippi State at 10. My numbers adored the SEC last year, especially last year. It's number 1 most years, but there was a big surge last year toward the SEC. And I think Mississippi State kind of rode that wave. I think they've still, if Joe Moorhead has the quarterback he needs for his system, then they're going to score 1,000,000 points. But it's not necessarily guaranteed to get any better without Nick Fitzgerald. Thompson, the likely starter there, kind of has the same all-or-nothing tendencies in terms of the pass, and so they might still be pretty inconsistent. And then, of course, they lose a bunch of defensive linemen whose names we're going to hear called on Thursday and Friday. So I would assume that's probably a little too high for them. Wisconsin's 11th, Notre Dame's 12th. If this were me doing it, I would probably have Notre Dame a little higher. But the way I try to look at the rankings that that my numbers come up with, it's a bunch of suggestions, like trying to convince me to change my own mind on things. So I'm trying to be a little more open-minded about the ceiling that Mississippi State and Wisconsin in particular have this year, as opposed to maybe where my conceptions were. But I'm not convinced just yet. I'm thinking Notre Dame or maybe a Texas A&M or Penn State or Washington are more likely top 10 teams than Mississippi State.
All right, Bill. And yeah, I asked if that was correct just because seeing here Bama, Georgia, and then Clemson. With Clemson winning, yeah. I didn't know if I was maybe reading the 2018 numbers. But did that surprise you that you had Alabama and Georgia ahead of Clemson given the national championship game last year?
Yeah, for me, it was a reminder that Georgia has been recruiting at an otherworldly level. They've been recruiting at a Bama level. They basically matched Alabama in recruiting the last 2 years. And they were probably top to bottom the best team in the country outside of those 2 last year as well, even though they certainly didn't try to prove so in the bowl game. So, It was a little surprising. I think I would have preferred to have Clemson in the top two, but I at least get it. Anybody other than Georgia, and I would have kind of wondered if I calculated something wrong, but I at least understand what the numbers see there.
Okay. And guys, check out Bill Connelly on SB Nation. He does the write-ups for all 130 plus college football teams. And Bill, I know you're only so far through now, mostly concentrating on the small conferences. So far, is there any kind of surprises you want to throw out there to the watchers as far as teams that might do a lot better than last year, or teams that actually might fall back and do a lot worse than last year?
Well, I think at the group of five level, that's obviously, I'm just about done with the group of five, and I'll start the power conferences next month. But I think of the group of five, I don't know if we're talking enough about Memphis as a contender for that New Year's Six bowl slot. Obviously, we know about Boise State. Obviously, we know about UCF. But Memphis returns an absolute ton from last year's team. They have a good schedule. They won't have to play UCF twice next year. They would only have to play them in the conference title game. And this really might be the year they can put things together and make a nice run. Overall, I don't know. Like, I think the Pac-12 race is still really interesting to me just because you can talk yourself into about 6 different teams having a really good shot. With the other conferences, not so much. Oklahoma is the clear favorite in the Big 12, and we know who the 2 favorites in the Big 10 are. We know who the SEC favorites are. But, we definitely know who the ACC favorite is. But the Pac-12 is still kind of a mystery, and I think you can find some value there just, based on Utah, I think, is kind of high in my numbers, and I think they're going to have a really good shot in the Pac-12. Washington still recruits really well and has a great defensive coaching staff that will probably allow them to overachieve their projections. You can talk yourself into going in a lot of different directions out there, so I'm kind of drawn to that one right now.
Nice. And Bill, we're running up against it as far as time-wise, getting the wrap-up here. But do want to come back with one question because you brought up the Pac-12. Do you think this is the year the Pac-12 steps back up and national championship contender and doesn't get locked out this year? They put up 1, maybe 2 teams that really got a shot at winning it all.
Yeah, I mean, Washington's the key there. Obviously now you do lose a lot of defenders. You lose Jake Browning and Myles Gaskin and whatnot, but you still have a blue chip quarterback in Jacob Eason. And like I said, I just kind of trust that the floor for that defense is pretty high. So I think you can talk yourself into them, even though they've got some new parts. Those parts are probably pretty good. And really Washington's problem in the last couple of years, they've been clearly the best, most consistent team in the conference. They just always manage to slip up in one game that they can't slip up in. And so that's something you can overcome. You continue to feel the best team in the conference, and eventually the breaks go your way, as they did a few years ago for Washington when they did make the CFP. So I think they were the most likely contender. As far as the Pac-12 as a whole kind of rising up again, obviously you need your blue bloods to follow through, to come through. And I have absolutely no idea what to make of USC this year. Obviously, anytime you look at USC on paper, you can talk yourself into them. And obviously, they've got Graham Harrell now as offensive coordinator. If they start scoring points as they always should, then sure. And if they're suddenly a top 10 or 12 team again, then the Pac-12 looks great all of a sudden because you've got Washington in the top 15. You've maybe got Utah in the top 15 or 20. Oregon is, I'm not completely sold on Oregon, but obviously they've got the quarterback. So suddenly you've got a good league again. It's really hard to live up to your potential when your blue bloods aren't living up to their potential.
All right, Bill, great stuff. As always, on Twitter at SBN_Bill C. He writes his 130 plus college football team previews at SB Nation. If you're not following him, if you're not reading his stuff, and you're a football fan, I very much suggest you do. He controls the market a lot more than I think he even realizes. I've talked to a lot of sports books. They all know sportsbook directors, Bill, and they all reference your work a lot. So, man, congratulations on all your accomplishments. Appreciate the time. We'll have you back on soon. Guys, thanks for tuning in. He's Bill Connelly. I'm Drew Martin. Best of luck with your bets.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our channel. Now, we've put a lot of work into producing all these free videos, so please help us out and keep all our content free for you forever by simply liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Now, not to mention, a visit to our industry-leading website will warm the hearts of all our SBR employees, especially myself. Now, the links are over there to the left, so do check those out. Thanks for watching.